Hello, this is Pastor Steve with your message of hope today. And we just finished book club. We were studying The Lion of the Forest, the life of James B. Finley. And if you don't know who James B. Finley is, you're really missing something. He was a Methodist pastor from about 1808 until the late 1850s. And as a really unique figure in American history, and somebody that shows that when you really, the Holy Spirit gets hold of you and you know the faith and you understand it and you have a strong relationship with Jesus Christ, God can accomplish some great things through you. This was a sort of a ne'er-do-well young man, and he was at Cane Ridge in 1801 at the revival there, and the Holy Spirit got a hold of him, and he gave his life to Christ. But then he had a period of backsliding, and he had an hunting accident, where he almost killed his brother, and spent some time soul-searching after that, and really repented and gave his life to Christ, recommitted in a very special way to be a pastor. And oh, was he a pastor. He spent the early part of his ministry as establishing a mission church for the Wyandot Indian tribe in northern Iowa, in Upper Sandusky. And one of the reasons he was willing to go there, and he became a fierce advocate, not only for the Wyandots, but also for the Kickapoo and a lot of the Native American tribes that lived in the Ohio Valley region, and was a fierce opponent of the removal policy that began with President Monroe and then really kicked up steam under President Jackson, and took some Native American pastors who had become Methodist pastors and went to Washington, and really was willing to stand up to the federal government in support of them. For example, the Wyandots had to sign a treaty in which they had to give up over 1 million acres in exchange for about 15 acres of land. Now that's not a fair treaty, and they eventually got moved off that and sent to Kansas. So a tremendous guy, lived with them, was a sort of an outdoorsman, and then after that became a fierce opponent of slavery. In fact, is historically significant in Methodism because he's the guy who wrote the resolution at General Conference in 1844 that eventually led to the separation of the Methodist Episcopal Church North and the Methodist Episcopal Church South over the issue of slavery. And once again, one of his compatriots in the mission field to the various Native American tribes was a fellow by the name of John Stewart, who was the first great Methodist missionary to the Native Americans and was a black man. And so the early Methodist Church was really a colorblind church, but it began to be affected by the culture, and the Southern Methodists began to be beholden to the slave owners and slavery and the economic value of that, and ended up being with the church splitting over that. Because even though the official position of the Methodist Episcopal Church was against slavery, and that no pastors could own slaves, they even elected in South Carolina a bishop, Bishop Andrews, who was a slave owner. And so that led to the split of the church. And Finley was a big, big part of that. And then at the latter part of his life, he became a chaplain at the penitentiary in Ohio. And who what a chaplain. At this point, the model of prison in the United States was extreme solitary confinement. There really wasn't lighting in the prison, so at night it was dark. And he was way ahead of his time. He felt like he left his family for 3 years in his late 60s and moved into the prison to be a chaplain. He felt like, just as he did when he said you had to live with people and meet them on their level in order to engage with them. When it was with the Wyandots or when he fought slavery, he also felt like he needed to live with the prisoners and was a fierce advocate to move beyond the retribution model of punishment for those in prison and even the deterrent model. And he moved toward a rehabilitation model, which became a movement in the 20th century. But this guy lived, 50 years before this. He saw it as a spiritual thing, that Christ died for all, and that there was no one that was beyond the saving grace of Christ. And that included these prisoners. And so he not only advocated for them to have a time where they could spend time in community, but he taught them, and he believed in spiritual nourishment and the power of conversion and rehabilitation. And the last significant thing he did was really fought to separate youthful offenders and adults under the theory of rehabilitation, that you could end the recidivism rate if you didn't house these teenagers in the same prison with these grown men. And so just so many significant things Reverend Finley was able to accomplish in his life. Not that he set out to be some kind of social crusader. All he set out to do was take the gospel wherever God sent him, to whomever God sent him, and with the firm belief that all people were equal and all people were worthy of the gospel, and all people could be saved and could be changed. And with that, his eyes were open, whether it was Native American tribes, slaves, prisoners. He also advocated that materials from the Methodist Publishing House be printed in multiple languages so that people who had emigrated to the United States could get materials in their own language. Just a tremendous guy, and somebody that's by and large forgotten by the modern world. But again, it's good to know your history because you know who you are and you know what God can do through people. So, once again, guess I got to get it right. James Finley, the Lion of the Forest. And that's your message of hope for today.